Welcome to the About the Face podcast, sponsored by the American Academy of Facial Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery through the Facial Plastic Surgery and Aesthetic Medicine Journal.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jacob Day, a facial plastic surgeon at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
And I'm Forrest Fearington. I'm a medical student at Mayo Clinic, and we're excited to discuss our upcoming publication in facial plastic surgery and aesthetic medicine titled Searching for Signs of Facial Plastic Surgery, Tracking the Eyes of Where Observers Look. So, Dr. Day, we were talking about this when we first started the project, but for those listening, what prompted you and the rest of the team to start this study?
It's a great question. Surveys show that the majority of patients considering facial plastic surgery desire a natural appearance. In fact, there was a survey published a couple years ago by McDonald and colleagues demonstrating that about 82% of patients considering facial cosmetic treatment were worried about looking done and did not want others to notice that they had received treatment. This is also important to my patients who are typically seeking facial rejuvenation that will make them look naturally refreshed and not overdone or unnatural. This got us interested in understanding how people, and specifically the general public or lay persons, direct attention to a face when trying to decide whether someone has had facial plastic surgery or not. And surprisingly, there's very limited literature on this.
So, bottom line, this topic of looking natural versus quote unquote looking done is very important to patients and therefore to facial plastic surgeons. But it's also very broad and fairly subjective in nature. So, how did you go about breaking ground on this topic and designing our study in the most objective manner possible?
Yeah, it's a broad topic with inherent subjectivity. So we leverage the power of eye tracking technology and a controlled study design to more objectively answer this question. Where on the face do observers direct their attention when searching for signs of facial plastic surgery and procedures? For those who don't know, eye tracking is a technology that we can use to precisely measure where observers direct their visual attention on a face. Eye tracking has been around for a long time and was first applied to the field of facial plastic surgery by my mentors at Johns Hopkins, Drs. Lisa and Masaru Ishii and colleagues. I learned the nuances of this technology from them and how to apply it to answer challenging questions in facial plastic surgery with a greater degree of precision and objectivity. So in this study, we used eye tracking to objectively measure where lay observers direct their attention to faces when searching for signs of facial plastic surgery. We spent a lot of time thinking about the design of this study to best answer our primary question. We first created an image set of highly standardized front view facial photographs in repose without a known history of facial plastic surgery and with no facial defects or stigmata of facial plastic surgery. This was important so that any measured differences in gaze patterns would be solely due to the observer's natural search patterns and not due to distracting scars, stigmata, or asymmetries from past facial plastic surgery. This image set included 40 individuals, 50% male, 50% female, with a diverse range of ages and races that reflect the U.S. population. We then recruited over 100 adult lay observers to complete the eye tracking study. There were 3 study groups: a task-based facial plastic surgery searching group, a control task-based attractiveness assessing group, and a control free gazing group. The facial plastic surgery searching group was instructed to search for any signs of facial plastic surgery or treatments when they looked at each facial image. The attractiveness assessing group was instructed to assess the attractiveness of each face when they looked at each facial image. The free gazing group was just instructed to freely gaze at the images without a specific task. I think these 2 control groups were important in the study design. The free gaze group provided a baseline control to understand how observers direct attention to the faces without task prompting. The attractiveness assessing group was a helpful control group to ensure that any measured changes in how attention was directed to faces when searching for signs of facial plastic surgery were unique to that task and not just related to the difference in task-based versus free gaze eye tracking. More plainly stated, it helped us determine that not all task-based prompts generate the same facial gaze patterns. So with that said, Forrest, why don't you briefly review how the data were collected and analyzed?
Yeah, so we used a screen-based infrared eye tracking camera system to collect the data. The infrared sensor was mounted to the bottom of a high-resolution monitor, and facial image size was standardized as described by Day et al. And Ishii et al. Faces were then randomly displayed to participants one image at a time for 10 seconds per image, as established by previous eye tracking studies. And then observers in each respective group viewed each face only once to avoid repeat measure bias. To analyze the data, areas of interest were defined for each face, which we said were the eyes, nose, mouth, central facial triangle, cheeks, forehead, hair, jaw, neck, and ears. And then we measured the gaze duration in milliseconds in each AOI, or area of interest, and analyzed this data using mixed effects linear regression models to address the study hypothesis. And we use the mixed effects linear regression analysis to control for inter-observer variability using random effects parameters for respondents. And our analysis revealed several interesting findings. Dr. Day, would you mind sharing some of the highlights?
Sure. I think first, our mixed effects models found that there were statistically significant differences in how attention was directed to faces in the three groups, which is important because that demonstrates that the task of searching for signs of facial plastic surgery prompted a unique facial gaze pattern, different from free gazing or when tasked to assess the face for attractiveness. Looking at our primary study group, we found that when observers were asked to look for signs of facial plastic surgery, the nose, the mouth, the cheeks, and the forehead experienced the most substantial increases in gaze time, and together took up more than 50% of overall gaze time compared to the free gazing observer group. Interestingly, while the eyes still received the most attention, the proportion of overall attention was significantly less compared to the free gazing group. The other facial AOIs did not show as substantial or significant of changes in our front view photographs. When looking at the impact of our demographics, we also found several interesting and significant differences in how male versus female faces were analyzed by observers, which we had to account for in the statistical analyses. When searching for signs of facial plastic surgery in female faces, observers directed relatively more time to the mouth, eyes, and central triangle, which comprises the eyes, nose, and mouth, while male faces had significantly increased gaze times in the nose, cheek, and jaw.
So, Dr. Day, in light of these findings, what would you say are your biggest takeaways from this project?
Yeah, for me, there are three main takeaways. One, we have shown that the task of searching for signs of facial plastic surgery fundamentally changes how visual attention is directed to a face. And this is unique from free gazing at a face or from other task-based facial assessments. Two, we show that on front view images, the nose, mouth, cheeks, and forehead are scrutinized most closely for signs of aesthetic procedures. And three, we show that the sex of the face influences how observers direct their attention when assessing for signs of facial plastic surgery.
I think that's interesting. I don't think there's been any other or many other studies that have really investigated these or found these findings. So what would you say are the implications of these findings and any potential limitations to consider when interpreting these results?
I think there are both clinical and research implications of this study. Clinically, these data may inform facial plastic surgeons and their patients on facial areas that observers will be most critical of when assessing for signs of facial plastic surgery. The data from the present study also create a foundation for future research aimed at understanding the nuances of how and why observers direct attention when searching for evidence of facial plastic surgery. The biggest limitation of this study is that we use static two-dimensional frontal photographs. We use this because this was a pilot study, and these images provided us with the most standardization and diversity. I would like future research to build upon this pilot study and have that future research include images with lateral views or even ideally 3D facial views that will be more comprehensive and which will more accurately reflect how we interact with each other in the real world.
Yeah, I know we're seeing some new studies coming out describing new ways to incorporate 3D images into eye tracking. And I know some people are even experimenting with videos and eye tracking, which would make eye tracking an even more valuable representative tool in facial plastics research going forward. So, on the topic of future directions, where do you see future research on this topic going?
Our findings, I think, provide a foundation for future research into what makes a face appear natural versus unnatural after aesthetic surgery. It will be important to incorporate multiple facial views or ideally standardized three-dimensional facial images into future studies. We also didn't ask this specific question in our study, but I think a lot of us are curious to know what specific features and or thresholds in certain facial areas, particularly the areas we uncovered in our study, make a face look like it's undergone aesthetic treatment. Until now, all of this has been very subjective, and I see a lot of potential to bring more objective eye tracking studies into this conversation.
I think that's a great note to end on. To the listeners, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and be sure to follow Dr. Day on Instagram at Dr. Jacob Day. Before we go, we'd like to thank the Facial Plastic Surgery and Aesthetic Medicine Journal for this opportunity to discuss our research, and also give a special thanks to our co-authors, Andrew Pumford and Andrew Awadallah, for all their help in this project. Thank you for listening.
We'd like to thank the authors for their commentary and thank you for listening to our podcast. If you'd like to explore more, please feel free to check out the article in print at the Facial Plastic Surgery and Aesthetic Medicine Journal or online. We'll catch you on the next one.